Hi, this is Synthchaser from synthchaser.com. I've not done a video yet on the ARP Explorer I, and since I'm about to dive into repairing 3 of them, I thought this would be a good time to show you the inside of the ARP Explorer I and give you an idea of what I do to repair and restore them. And we're in for a real treat because here we've got ARP Explorer serial number 1, the very first ARP Explorer ever manufactured. I'll probably do a second video with a functional demonstration of the Explorer, but real quickly to tell you what it is a single oscillator. In fact, the oscillator is the exact same module that's used in the ARP 2600. So a single oscillator synthesizer, and basically it uses some divide down sub-oscillators, and you can pick which sub-octaves you want to hear. And it has some predefined wave shapes. There's brass, which is sawtooth, square wave, pulse, a narrow pulse, and then fuzz, which is kind of a pulse width modulation. And there's white noise. It's got a voltage controlled filter. The filter module used in this is the 4034 submodule, the same one found in the ARP Pro Soloist. And you can modulate it with the ADSR or LFO. It's got an ADSR. And it has these preset manual switches, so you can either use what ARP defined as a preset for the filter and the ADSR, or you can turn the switch down like this, and then you can play with the sliders, and they'll have effect. It's got an LFO for vibrato. There's the depth for the vibrato. It has vibrato delay, pitch bend, portamento, and the keyboard or auto repeat like you'd find on the ARP Odyssey. So this is called the ARP Explorer I. There never was an ARP Explorer II, so in case you're wondering, it's just the one. The synthesizer model number is 2900, so there was the obviously the 2500 modular synthesizer, 2600. The 2700 was the ARP Soloist, followed by the 2701 Pro Soloist. 2800 was the original ARP Odyssey, and then 2900 is this ARP Explorer. I don't know what state any of these Explorers are in, and as is the case with most vintage ARPs, to turn it on and see what's working, what's not working is kind of counterproductive. It's not going to be working, and turning it on really is going to have no good can come of that. Basically, we need to take a methodical approach to repairing and restoring these, and that will minimize the amount of work we have to do in the long run. So the repair strategy is going to involve recapping the synthesizers. So the power supply capacitors are probably past their prime, and then ARP used these dodgy tantalum capacitors, which are prone to shorting out. And pretty much as a rule of thumb in the vintage ARPs, those tantalum capacitors should be replaced. We're also going to address the sliders. On an unserviced ARP, you can pretty much guarantee that the sliders are going to be causing problems. And since audio signal paths pass through the sliders, it'll cause functionality issues, not just scratchiness when you move the pot. So when repairing vintage ARPs, I always just go through and replace the pots. Maybe I'll do another video at some point comparing options for the slider pots, but these are pretty seized up, so they're not going to be working right. So I mean, you can either disassemble the original ones and clean them, or do what I'm going to do and replace them with new ones, and I'll show you what I use for that once we get into it. Another thing we're going to be doing is refurbishing the keybeds on all of them. So like on this one, you can hear that there's bushings missing. The bushings don't sound that great. And invariably, when the bushings are in that state, the bus bars and the key contacts are also going to be pretty heavily oxidized, and that's going to cause some issues with keys not triggering, double triggering, or whatnot. So just proactively, we know that's going to need to be done, so I'll do that before I even turn the synthesizers on. And only after I've done the capacitors, the sliders, and the keybed, I'll connect everything outside the case on the bench, power it up, repair any remaining functional issues, calibrate it, and then put it back in its case and call it done. So let's get started. So to get into an ARP Explorer, you turn it over, and there should be 4 rubber feet on the corners and 2 additional screws in the middle. This one only has a 1 rubber foot. So when we put it back together, we're going to put a new set of rubber feet. So I've taken the back panel off, and you can see what's inside is actually not that much. There's the power supply here, which is the same ARP power supply that's used in other models like the Odyssey and whatnot. We've got our keybed here. The keybed is actually situated over one of the circuit boards because you'll recall there was a row of switches along the front of the synthesizer that lets you pick the waveform and octaves. And that circuit board is here. You'll see it when we take the keybed out. That has the VCO on it. Over here we've got the board with the filter and the ADSR, and then the remaining circuit board is here. So what I'm going to do is I am going to take all this stuff out. Here's the first pro tip I'll give you on repairing ARPs. Mark the polarity of the connectors with a Sharpie. So I just make a little mark on the circuit board and a little mark on the nylon housing of the Molex connector, because while there's a little locking ramp on it, this thing is not keyed, and there's no locking ramp on the pins, so you can wind up plugging things in backwards, especially this one, which is the power plus and minus 15 volts. You can very easily just stick it in backwards, and that would be bad news for your synthesizer. So do yourself a favor, and when you take things apart, even if you work on them all the time like I do, I still mark them, just so there's absolutely every chance in the book to plug it in the correct way. So there's a few connectors. The power supply connector goes here, and then there's some ribbon cables that bring the power to the other boards. This connector here is for the keybed, and then this connector here just goes to the audio output jacks. So not that many connectors to worry about marking, but do mark them. Before I move the shell out of the way, there's one modification that I'm going to do. And you see on the back here, these are the outputs. And there's the high output, which is a RCA jack, and there's the low output, which is a 1/4 inch jack. And well, no one uses RCA jacks, but you do want that high level output. So what I'm going to do, I mean, I've seen people take the RCA jack, drill a wider hole, and put a 1/4 inch jack, but there's really no need to do that. All you need to do is, there's basically a resistor divider here. So the only output coming from the board is ground and high level output. And then this resistor here is used to drop the voltage to a lower voltage for the low jack. So what we're going to do is we're just going to put a little jumper wire here across this resistor, and that way we'll have the high level output at the 1/4 inch jack, and we're not doing any kind of invasive or permanent modification. If anyone wanted to go back to original, all they'd need to do is snip that wire off. And here's a close-up of the wire installed. It's the red wire that I put in. And you can do this modification on any ARP that uses the RCA jack and 1/4 inch for the low. This is the approach you want to take to make that 1/4 inch high. And this is just like a little something that you can do when you repair an ARP, or that takes very little time for you, but makes a huge difference for whoever uses the instrument, because this low-level output really sucks. Because I'm kind of just weird this way, I'm going to keep all the boards with the shell that I took them out of. I'm not going to mix and match them, so I've put them in a bin and labeled it, and now I'm going to go get the next one. Here's the next one. This one has no feet, and I can actually hear something rattling around inside of it. So what I was hearing rattling around inside were these little rock-hard bushing fragments that crumbled apart from the keybed and started rattling around inside. And the keyboard connector here has been disconnected, so someone was probably having some kind of issues with this one before they decided to get rid of it. And I'm just going to take a wild guess that they were having a problem with a stuck note there. Just a hunch. Also, this isn't very good. Take a look at this. This is the mains transformer, and it came detached from the circuit board. It's just flopping around in here, so that's got to be fixed. And here's the serial number 1 unit, and this one has a European style power plug, and because I'm going to be changing this back to 120 volts, I'm going to also replace the power cord with an original US style power cord. So this shows the power supply configured to run off 240 volts. The transformer is capable of either 120 or 240, and it just depends how you wire these terminals here. I have a video, Synthchaser 116, where I explain all this and show how to convert from one method to the other. You can watch me void the warranty on this one. They had a little red paint on there so they could see if anyone unscrewed the board, and oh, there we go. Finally broken after all these years. To change the power cord on these, you need a bushing pulling tool, and I'll link that in the video description. Basically, there's a little strain relief bushing here that prevents the wires from being yanked off the power supply if the cord is tugged on. And I see all too often people just, without the tool, go ahead and just cut the cord here and solder some wires and wrap electrical tape around it, and that is very, very sketchy. Don't do that. That's all there is to it when you have the right tool. Here are the Keybeds. I've done plenty of videos already showing the restoration of Pratt Reed Keybeds, so I'm not going to show that here. But basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the thing completely apart. I'm going to ultrasonically clean the plastic keycaps. I'm going to change the rubber bushings, and I'm going to clean the bus bar and J-wires on the bottom. Then I'm going to put it back together and adjust everything. And I'm going to do what I wish I could do and just snap my fingers and have it all done. Oh, if it was only that easy. And check out what I saw when I was working on one of the Keybeds. So it looks like some bushings came off, and rather than replacing them with bushings, someone replaced them with like some self-adhesive type junk. I don't know if that's felt or this thing is just like maybe a piece of chewing gum. I'm not sure. This is what we call the work of the synth MacGyver, the kind of person that repairs synthesizers with paper clips and rubber bands, duct tape, chewing gum, electrical tape, stuff like that. That's the synth MacGyver, and he's been at work in this one. Here are the circuit boards out of one of the ARP Explorers, and we can see on the oscillator board, it's got a 4027-1 encapsulated VCO submodule. This is exactly the same one that you'd find in later ARP 2600s. And it also has on the filter board, filter ADSR board, it has a encapsulated 4034 filter submodule, just like you'd find in the ARP Pro Soloist. Now I'm going to depopulate the components that I'll be replacing. So I'm going to be replacing all the sliders, so there's 12 of them across those two boards. I'm going to be replacing the electrolytic capacitors. There's only 2 of them here in the power supply. And I'm going to be replacing the tantalum capacitors, these little red blobs that you find on each of the circuit boards. For the desoldering, I'm going to be using this tool, and I'll link it in the description of the video. And this tool is really helpful, particularly on the sliders, like these sliders on this board where there's traces on both sides of the board. So it's particularly difficult to desolder these parts and get the solder off the joints on both sides of the board without a tool like this. So now that I've got the old parts off, I'm going to do a little cleanup to the boards. These boards actually are pretty clean already. Oftentimes ARP boards, or pretty much any synthesizer that has sliders, the boards get really filthy where the openings for the sliders are. In this case, there's just a tiny bit of dust that got in, so I'm just going to use a rag with some IPA and clean that up. If the board were much dirtier than this, I'd consider washing it in the sink. I have a video where I show how to do that, and I'll link that video above. One of the reasons you want to clean this board is to get all the old flux residue off, typically around the sliders and switches, although this board looks like it was cleaned at the factory. There's not a ton of flux residue on it. Let me go grab one of the other ones. Here you can see around the switches here, this is flux residue that was left over from the factory when they soldered those switches in initially. And oftentimes it's on the sliders as well. You want to clean that off so you can solder the new parts properly. Both the part that you're soldering and the pad on the circuit board should be clean of all debris and residues, and especially burnt flux residue is not going to be helpful in getting a good solder joint on your new parts. Another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clean the levers of the switches here. You can see they're fairly dirty, and they'll clean up with just some alcohol. So do this on the top and bottom of the switches. So you can see, you can compare here the one that's been cleaned to one that hasn't been cleaned yet. And just so you know, these are not the same switches that are in the ARP Pro Soloist. The ARP Pro Soloist has symmetrical switches. These switches are actually asymmetrical, so you'll notice it goes down further this way than it does this way. Also, the ARP Pro Soloist switches are all two-pole switches, so there's two sets of switch contacts inside. Some of these Explorer switches are four-pole switches. You'll see that the body of this switch is much thicker than the body of this switch. It's because there's basically four switches in one here. You can see them in there. So I'm going to clean the outside of the switches, and then I'll clean the switch contacts. So the next thing I'm going to do is clean the contacts of the switches. And the best way to do that would be to desolder the switches from the board, disassemble the switch, clean all the parts, put it back together, resolder it to the board. The problem is there's solder joints on both sides of this board. It's very difficult to get these switches off without damaging them. So unless they really, really need it, I'm just going to use a chemical method for cleaning them. So I'm going to use the deoxit here in the little syringe bottle. I'll have a link to the deoxit so you can get that if you want it. So what I'm going to do is I've kind of toggled the switch so I can see the contacts, at least one set of the contacts, and then I'm going to take the needle applicator and I'm going to put not even a full drop, like half a drop on each one of those contacts. I'm going to toggle the switch, turn the board around, and do the same to the other side. There is a set of contacts in the center that I will not be able to get to with the needle, and then there's also a contact that moves when you exercise the switch, and that I won't be able to get to with the needle applicator. But by putting it on the outside contacts, I go ahead and exercise this 20-30 times, it is going to get some of that deoxit chemical on the center contact and on the contacts that are inside the lever. So I'm going to repeat that now for all the switches, including this style of switch. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clean up the potentiometers. So there's a pot here for pitch bend, and there's a pot on the oscillator board for the tuning. So first, before I clean those, internally, I'm going to get some alcohol on a rag and just clean off the housing of it, because there's all this kind of grime on the shaft of the pot and on the body of the pot. So we want to clean that off so it doesn't find its way inside to the pot, either when we clean it or at some point in the future. Look at that. It almost looks new now. And to clean this, I'm going to get the pot turned to its midpoint and take a little of this deoxit spray. Again, I'll link the product so you can get it if you're interested. And just spray a tiny bit into the pot and exercise the pot about 20 times or so. And then this does leave like a greasy residue, so I'm going to wipe off anything that drains out of it and anything that got on the circuit board. And there we go. So I'll do the same on the other pot. So I'm going to be installing my capacitor kit that I sell for the ARP Explorer. I also have an IC kit. So, and a reason that you might want to use that is if maybe you don't have the time, tools, or experience to troubleshoot problems with the synthesizer. Changing the chips has the potential of fixing problems that exist. I'm going to go the route of troubleshooting any problems when we set it up on the bench and test it, so I'm not going to replace all the chips. However, there are some chips that are in sockets. So while I've got the boards out, it would take very little time to pop these chips out of their socket and test them. There's only a couple of them, so I'll do that. This first chip, 4024, passed the test. And this second chip, the 4011, failed its test. So we can go ahead and replace that chip now, save ourselves some trouble later. So I've replaced that 4011 chip that was bad. It's interesting, the CMOS chips here, there's only two CMOS chips in the synthesizer, and they have them both in sockets. There's a transistor array chip here, a 3086, and then there's a bunch of op amps throughout, the voltage regulator on the power supply. So some of those chips may be bad, and we'll just test it out, and we'll see, and if there's a problem, we'll troubleshoot it, and we'll figure out if it's a bad chip or not. Next, I'll install my capacitor kit. So with the capacitors installed, the next thing I'm going to do is install the sliders. And you'll notice that these look very different from these ones that I removed. There's a few options for dealing with ARP sliders. You have to do something. You can't just leave them the way they were, because they're not going to be working properly. And you can't really spray these with stuff. You're just going to make a mess of the boards, and you're not going to get the sliders clean. So you can desolder them, disassemble them, and put them back together, and they may work when you're done with that. But oftentimes parts inside the slider, the carbon track or the conductive track, just get shot. So for a while I was selling replacement sliders, reproduction versions of these. The quality was so-so, but I have better options now, so I've discontinued selling the reproduction sliders. And what I'm putting in this one is called the Synthchaser Precision Slider Kit. So what this is it's a new manufactured high quality slider made by Borns, and I've built adapters, and they come pre-assembled and just ready to drop in there and solder into place. I make this for a bunch of the ARP synthesizers, like on the ARP Odyssey. Like that whole bottom section of the board is one straight one board of one assembly of sliders with gaps in between, so you still can access the test points and stuff like that. But you just drop it in. There's no fiddly stuff to build. It's just ready to go. And this style, the Synthchaser Precision Slider Kit, fits the original slider caps from the older style ARP slider caps, not the hard caps. It fits these soft caps. So this is one option, and I'm going with this option on the Explorer because I think whoever buys this is going to value its originality. It is a bit of a collector's piece. I also have the Synthchaser Precision LED slider kit, which is a similar thing. So this is a board that goes in an ARP Omni 2. And it's the same deal. It's new sliders, really precise. You can get these, to the exact setting that you want. Whereas on the other one, they kind of you try to push it and it jumps. So they're very precise, and these can be illuminated. They don't have to be illuminated, but you can, when you install it, you can hook it to power, and the LEDs in the shaft will illuminate. You don't have to do that. And in fact, I have some slider caps that fit these. These don't fit any of the original ARP slider caps, but I have some caps that go on these. And without the illumination, they actually look very similar to the hard black plastic Mark III Odyssey ARP Omni 2 style slider cap. If you do hook it to power, the LEDs will shine through a little translucent window in the slider cap, and it looks really, really cool. And colors can be customized and all that stuff. So there's two options. Two real options there is the Synthchaser Precision Slider Kit, which we're going to put here, and the Synthchaser Precision LED Slider Kit, which I've been offering for a lot longer than this non-illuminated one. So I'm going to go install these, and then we should be done with the general work to the circuit boards. With the new sliders soldered into place, I've pretty much finished the general work to the circuit boards. So I'm going to take this set of boards and put them aside, get the next set of Explorer boards, and repeat this whole process 2 more times. So now I'm going to be testing, repairing, and calibrating these 3 circuit boards from inside the synthesizer. There is the 4th board, the power supply, and I did test those independently outside the synthesizer. I'm not going to show that because I don't want to show things that may encourage people to try things that get themselves zapped. But I did test those power supplies, and of the 3 power supplies, 2 of them were working fine. One of them had a problem with the negative 15 volt rail due to a bad transistor, which I replaced. So the power supplies are done, and now I've got it connected to a bench power supply. The advantage of this is, number 1, it's safer than setting up the power supply from the synthesizer on the bench. Number 2, I can see the current draw on both of the power rails, so I can see if the boards are drawing excessive current, which indicates that there may be a problem. In this case, I'm drawing 47 milliamps on the negative 15 volt rail, and also 47 milliamps on the positive 15 volt rail, which is typical for this synthesizer at rest. The third advantage is I can set a current limit. So here I have it set at 1 amp, but I probably could set it for like 200 milliamps or so. But the advantage of that is if I do power up the boards and there is a short circuit, the power supply is going to limit the current to the board so nothing gets fried. So I have the benchtop power supply connected here. I have a audio jack crudely clipped on here, and I have a keybed plugged in here, and the 3 boards are connected with the ribbon cables, and I can play the synthesizer and test all the features and make sure everything's working good. And once everything's working fine, then I can calibrate it. There's a few calibrations that need to be done: the oscillator, the filter, the VCA, and some others. On this particular one, we have a little problem in that the noise, the white noise, is not working. So I have a square on but I also have the white noise on, and you can hear there's no difference with the white noise on or off. So for that we have the oscilloscope, and we can go probing around. Is the problem with the switch? Is the problem with the op amp for the noise? Well, let's take a look. If we're getting white noise output from the white noise circuit, we should see it on pin 6 of this op amp, and we don't. So our problem is with the white noise circuit, and I can troubleshoot that further and repair it. And in this case, it sure was the op amp, so white noise is fixed with the op amp replaced. Let's see if I can show you that without blocking the scope. There's the white noise on pin 6 of that op amp. So now that I've got everything working, I'm going to calibrate the boards here on the bench where things are easier to get to, and I can repair things if for some reason something won't calibrate. I'm going to start with the oscillator board, then I'm going to go to the filter board, and then finally down here do the pitch bend and vibrato delay trims. Finally, when I put everything back in the case, I'm going to need to adjust the power supply voltages with the load connected to be exactly plus or minus 15 volts to match what I've got here on my benchtop supply. So that way it won't really matter that I've not done this with the stock power supply, because the voltage supplied to the boards is going to be exactly the same. If I were doing this in the case with the stock power supply connected, I would first want to adjust the power supply to be exactly plus or minus 15 volts, then move on to the oscillator, the filter, and then so forth. And there we have it. 3 ARP Explorer Is, all restored and repaired and ready to go to new homes. I hope you found this to be an interesting look inside the ARP Explorer I. This has been Synthchaser from synthchaser.com. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.